Here we go. And I quote, "I'll be there in a minute. Give me a second."
Time is relative, folks. Time is relative.
Yes. So, hey, cheers to everybody in the chat. They're a division rival. I don't care how many wins they get. Screw them.
That wasn't the take I was expecting to hear.
I want to gush over watching live Chris Tanev.
I think that we completely underestimate the skill it takes to play defense.
One highlight or several highlights does not a Calder trophy make.
I'm stepping in here. I'm going to be the crotchety old man here. They need to learn patience. They need to understand the tension, everything, and the drama.
How dare! Look at this. How is McDavid not getting a penalty?
You guys need to calm down with this, okay? You guys need to calm down with it.
Well, nothing calm about the game of hockey right now. It just came off one of the feverish pitches, I think, nationally, North American-wise, that has happened in a long time. Of course, with the Four Nations, and the Calgary Flames are back in action on Sunday playing the San Jose Sharks, and they prepare for the gauntlet of a road trip that may or may not define their season. Welcome to the Shifts and Pucks podcast. You can follow us on Twitter /X at Shifts and Pucks, Facebook.com Shifts and Pucks, YouTube.com Shifts and Pucks. Subscribe wherever you get your audio as well. And joined you as after a little bit of a break, Dan Stevenson, Fireside Chat, taking a break from chatting Flames, but back. How was your time off?
It was nice. It's, I think you probably feel this way too, but being in Flames media, we get so involved in the team. You're watching so many games. You're, looking at all the news. You're listening to the fan sentiment between games. And it's really nice mid-season just to have a little bit of a break for that. Yeah,
it just felt like it was, as we hit that break, it was, you had the kind of a gauntlet of a homestand with Washington, Toronto, Colorado. And things didn't really go well against Toronto. Things didn't really go well against Colorado. And then you played 55 minutes of a really solid game against the Seattle Kraken. But the Kraken ended up winning that game. And it left you with a little bit of a punch in the stomach in terms of just how you lose that game. And I think there was the height of the frustration for Flames fans started here. You could argue Dustin Wolf needed a break. You could argue just the team just sort of needed this mental reset. It kind of came at the break came at a good time and back, and we're kind of in an interesting spot where the Flames are about to go on this road trip that will establish where they are at March 7th, I think. I don't know. We'll dig into this a little bit more as we get into it. But there was some Flames news. I think let's start there. Tyson Barrie left.
Before we start there, is there anything about the Four Nations you want to talk about so we can wrap that up?
Yes, I put this in the agenda. Did you end up watching the Four Nations?
No.
You okay, because I will credit you for staying in your cynicism, because a lot of people said, I will not watch, and then watched. So you did not. I will give you.
I saw maybe a period or two as I was out places and it was on TV, but I did not sit down and watch an entire game.
Okay. You did miss, you missed some incredible hockey for sure.
Oh, I don't doubt it. Anytime you have some of the best playing some of the other best, you're going to get good hockey.
But this had such a different this was unique because I think the political climate around Canada and the US played a lot into this.
If this was next year at the Olympics, or even next year anywhere, it would not have been as interesting because the political climate will change. I think a lot of the interest in this. I know people that weren't hockey fans that were watching it just to see, you know, if the anthems got booed and stuff like that. I think that there was a lot of political interest just because of where we are in the world.
Yeah, I think that had a lot to do with it. I think I don't want to get too political over this, but I think the US was very vocal about how they felt about the flag being booed. I think the one thing that wasn't talked about, and I thought John Cooper kind of quietly said it best, they knew Canada needed this. Right? They knew, I think the team quietly was like, they didn't make a big bravado about it. They didn't make this big, we're Canada. But you know, this whole conversation, I think Canada, I think they knew Canada needed it. And did they blow the US out? No, it was a phenomenal hockey game and all of that. But you know, and I think coming away with that from a Canadian perspective, they handled this very Canadian.
Even though I didn't watch it, I know how things happen. I know what the storylines were. Like, I wasn't totally, you know, shut off from this. I'm surprised how physical it was. And I think that was one of the storylines too. Like, look at all those fights in the first Canada-US game.
Yeah, with Tkachuk and Hagel and Sam Bennett and Brady Tkachuk and then you had the JT Miller Colton Parayko fight. It kind of, you know, there was a shot during that game that John Tortorella at the US bench, and it just reminded me of that Flames Canucks line brawl a number of years ago. But yeah, I mean, the hockey was incredible. I even think Finland and Sweden showed themselves. Like, Sweden didn't lose in regulation. Sweden wins their one game against the US, but then they lose to Finland in overtime, and they lose to Canada in overtime. There's a 6-1 dud of a game between US and Finland, but other than that, Finland competes. So, I mean, overall, I think the event turned out really well. It was well watched. And the biggest flaw and the biggest sort of catastrophe was the illnesses that were going around and of course, Cale Makar was sick, so Thomas Harley was like a kid in your class. He wasn't sure if he could enter the room because there would have been too many people, so he was waiting for the other student to leave. And can I go in the room? Well, I got to wait for the student to leave, kind of thing. And then you had the whole situation with Quinn Hughes. Was he traveling back from Vancouver to Boston and back, or just that part? You needed some sort of tax.
There's things like that you can tell they put this tournament together in a year, right? Yeah. They didn't have some of that plan and some of those ideas around how they wanted to do that, and you know what that was going to look like. And even with Mackenzie Weegar, I mean, it was will he, won't he, right up until almost the day it started.
Yeah, even Sidney Crosby was a tournament time decision.
Yeah, but I mean, Sidney had been named to the team, right? But there was no, like you said, they really should have named a taxi squad.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was the kind of the big flaw of that tournament. But I mean, you have the Olympics next year. I don't
have I talked on my show on your show about why I didn't watch it, or just on our show?
We've talked about it. You have said you didn't think that this would be an intense tournament, and this is not best on best because we don't have
Russia and the Czechs,
and
even Draisaitl,
Leon Draisaitl, and a bunch of other.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's good hockey, and we knew it would be. It was a lot more. I didn't know if it was going to be all-star game quality hockey or, you know, NHL quality hockey, and I was surprised to see some of the physicality. What I was worried about is that, I mean, these are the best players on every team, and honestly, Kevin, I was worried that somebody was going to get hurt and then be unavailable for their team as they make that run for the playoffs. And that's, I think, one of the downsides of having this event when it is in the season.
Yeah, I got to tell you though, I was a September person before this tournament, and this is an area that I have changed on, because I think that you look at, yes, it was intense. It's the midseason, And yes, there's injuries. It's unfortunate. Boston's losing Charlie McAvoy. Florida loses Matthew Tkachuk. Quinn Hughes is still may or may not be in the lineup. You have all of these situations, but I just the way that this was right after the Super Bowl, you had the NBA went through an absolute PR disaster of an All-Star game. And the NHL did, like, what happened here is the NHL did take a step in terms of popularity. Some of the most watched hockey and people talking about hockey that don't talk a lot about hockey. So I think in that sense, I think the NHL made a big step. There were flaws for sure. Absolutely. I totally agree with you. I mean, but what turned out here, I think, was just worked really well.
Yeah. And I even saw someone who posted online. I don't know who it is to give them credit, but they had the idea, and I don't think it would work, and I'll explain the idea, and then I'll explain why I don't think it would work, is they said do the preliminary round with more teams in September and then play the finals during this time. And I don't think it would work because you would lose all that momentum.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's injuries and all of that sort of stuff. And
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I love that so many players got a break. And the one thing I'm worried about going forward is it used to be that every team got a bye week on one side of the All-Star game. So everybody got time off, whether you're an All-Star or not. And I worry going forward that if they're going to keep doing this, and I guess it's going to be every second year they're going to do international play, and then between there an All-Star game. But I think you do need, when you have as rigorous a schedule as the NHL does, you need a break.
Yeah. Yeah. I do agree with you. I do wonder. One of the conversations I do think hasn't happened that I think should happen, and I think there's some people for this. I wonder if at some point we start the regular season a week early, and then you can give yourself that break because it's like when you add the playoffs and the like last year was such a long year because you had the 7-game Stanley Cup final.
Yep.
And then you had the 2 days in between between 5, 6, and 7. That was a long.
And even when we say start early, remember we're already starting late. We're still starting post-COVID time. This isn't when we were starting before COVID. So you could get back to, like late September to get your season going and still probably, get what you need out of it.
Yeah. Like if you could start the regular season in the beginning of October, I think that helps because
I also think that, really, with 4 games, and I know they put days between them, you could run this every day, right? I mean, your team's not going to play every day, but your team played 3 games. You could get this whole thing done in 5 days if you want to do this again and give both teams time on either side. And really, like the tournament ended Friday and regular season, or Thursday night, regular season play started again Sunday. Like these guys didn't get a break.
Not really, no. I mean, there were some afternoon games after the night game, right? And that ends at 1. You have the day off, and then you're playing, and you're just getting your legs back at 1 to play a game at 1 Eastern in some cases, right?
Yeah.
So, the flaws are there. I do agree with you, but it was. I worked Saturday night in a newsroom there was a bunch of people in that newsroom that do not typically watch hockey that just lost their minds with the 3 fights in 9 seconds. So,
I think, it felt to me like an old school international game, and I mean, I have a colleague who watched the first period of the finals, said there's no fights, I'm leaving. Like it's been a long time since we see fights in the NHL, especially at that level, and I think that, and that many. And I think that this really appealed to, for better or for worse, the broad fan because of that.
Yeah. It just created a conversation. And, of course, Matthew and Brady Tkachuk are somewhat involved. And,
But anyway, let's move on to Flame stuff.
Yeah. Let's get to the news. There was some news that happened over the time off, and it involved Tyson Barrie. He left practice Wednesday morning. He was placed on waivers on Thursday. He was sent down to the Wranglers on Friday. And Elias Oliov, who made his debut for the season debut against the Seattle Kraken on Saturday, pairing up with Rasmus Andersson. I guess, first of all, with Tyson Barrie, he played 13 games, so I don't know if this was much of a surprise that he was.
Remember, he was already sent down. He was sent on a conditioning stint earlier in the year, and they had to recall him because they ran into some issues on the blue line.
Yeah, so this was the second one.
He didn't have to clear waivers the first time because of a conditioning stint, but then they needed him back right away because they lost Ball.
Yeah, so
he played 2 games with the Wranglers earlier this year.
I kind of, he became one of the internet whipping boys because of the way Tyson Barrie has never been a stout defensive player, and I don't think he was. I don't know. I don't want to criticize Huska for a lot of things, but I don't know if Tyson Barrie was used the way Tyson Barrie can play, which is a puck moving power play type of guy on the right side. He was playing more on the left side. I think I give Tyson Perry a ton of credit for being a good team guy. Did it work? No. Do I wish him well in the Wranglers? Yes.
And I don't necessarily think this is over, Kevin. He's gone to the Wranglers. He cleared waivers. You can bring him back for up to 10 games or 30 days now without him clearing again. I think that they want to give Soloviev a shot, and that's what you should be doing, I think, at that, in that bottom pair. But I don't think this is a banishment. I think they want to get Barrie going. And if you're taking a defenseman from the Wranglers, let's give them one back to get them going.
Yeah, I think that's it too. And they did bring up Yan Kuznetsov to have a look at practice. They did end up sending him down. So we'll see the lineups. But the Friday,
from what I understand, a lot of that to do with the fact that they didn't want Anderson to work too hard after the Four Nations. They just want another body there.
Yeah. I think that's entirely it. I think if they were playing this game on Saturday, I don't think Rasmus Andersson's in the lineup. And I know that he would have had some time off, but I think they probably would have liked to have given him an extra day. Now, a couple of other interesting things here was the practice lines on Friday and the defense pairs. So actually, we'll go backwards and do the defense pairs first because Kevin Ball was back on practicing with Rasmus Andersson. It was Joel Hanley with Mackenzie Weeker. It was Jake Beam with Braden Pahal and Soloviev with Daniil Miramanov. Now, I think an interesting conversation here. Of course, I think Ryan Huska did say today we will see later if they activate Ball and Connor Zary, which we'll get to in a moment. But who do you think ends up playing more, Soloviev or Miramanov?
This season?
Yeah.
Why does that have to be one or the other? Why can't they play together? That's how they lined up in practice.
Who are you? Are you benching Bean and Pahal for Soloviev and Miramanov?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you're thinking either Bean or okay. I think that if you're not going to play them, Soloviev needs to go back to the minors. You don't want him just sitting around, especially with the run that the Wranglers are on. I think if you just want a guy hanging around, you keep Miramanov here. He's under contract for another year, so why not? In terms of who will actually play more, I think Soloviev probably plays more if you just need a quick call up at home. They're about to go on a road trip. I think they'll bring him with them for an extra body. But I think if you're at home and you say, hey, let's take Bean out of lineup for a night and put Soloviev in, that's an easy call up. But if you're down in Tampa, that's a harder call up. So I think you put Miramanov in, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is depending on the situation. I think
for this long road trip they're about to go on, I think Soloviev comes with them, and I think he will play more than Miramanov on that trip.
Yeah, I could see that. And I guess I don't know where the Flames are at with Miramanov.
I don't know where they have to be at. I mean, he's signed for one more year. I think that last year he got put into the top 4 because they ran out of bodies on defense, right? They moved out a couple big bodies and they just need someone who could play defense. I think Miramanov's fine as a 6'7" for where this team is. If this team is going for the Stanley Cup, no. As a rebuilding team, sure. He's a good 5-6 at $1.5 million or whatever they're paying him next year. I don't think that we need to overanalyze this guy. He's good enough.
Yeah,
He's making 1.25 this year, 1.25 next year. Give him your 14, and he's a right shot, which they need a few of. Like, give him the number 7, and I think it's fine.
Yeah. I guess for me, the reason I ask is it's kind of fascinating the trajectory that Miramonov has been through since he's been here, because he was top 4 when he got here, of course, at the end of the year.
But again, I think he was only top 4 because we ran out of bodies, right?
Yeah.
We had no Hanifin, no Tanev. I don't think they brought him in to be a top 4. Then they brought him in because, oh, crap, we need a defenseman. Hey, look, there's one.
Yeah. I think if they had their druthers, though, Dan, I think if there was a way to do it, unfortunately, I just don't know where it makes sense. I think that Miramonov is kind of in a rock and a hard place, because I think this is a guy that I think probably could use AHL time, the Always Hungry League, as someone called it. I don't think I don't think he's quite an NHL defenseman. I think he's close to being a regular NHL defenseman, but I don't think he's
at this point, though, Kevin, he's 27. If he's not an NHL defenseman now, he's not going to be.
Well, you still could. I mean, he had a pretty significant injury that curtailed his career for a bit.
But I think if you're sending him down, then you're going to get passed by Soloviev, Kuznetsov, Poirier. Like, especially on this team, if that's not you, I think if they send him down, he goes to the back of the line.
Yeah,
and I think in fairness to Miramonov, I think that he was slotted into the top 6, and I think Pakal has taken that spot.
Yes,
I'm really proud of Braden Pakal and what he's done. He came in as kind of a nobody, and I think Pakal has taken that more than Miramonov has not been given it. I think they're both given equal opportunity, and Pakal ran with it.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think Braden Pakal. I mean, there's no real issue on the right side of this blue line with Anderson, Weegar, and Pakal. It's the left side that's been sort of more the question with. And you saw that missing Kevin Ball, but Jake Bean probably is playing too much for what Jake Bean can do, and Joel Hanley is probably playing too much for what Joel Hanley can do, which is part of the problem.
And that's where, again, I think you'll probably see, especially Hanley, rotated out. Like, I can't see Hanley being in the top 4 with Weegar moving forward for the rest of the season. But I think Pahal stays in, but I think between Hanley and Bean, I think if you want to talk about who slots in there, I think Soloviev will get some early looks on this road trip, if not tonight against San Jose. I mean, what a great time to put an AHL guy in your lineup is when you're playing an AHL team, and see what he can do. And I think, again, it's going to be his way to play himself out of a spot.
Yeah.
But I don't think you want to keep Soloviev sitting on your bench. You want him to develop. And so if you're not going to play him, you got to send him back down.
Yeah.
Just like
he's
with
the guy you need to play. Yeah. The forward lines are basically, it's Kadri, Huberdeau, Coronado, who played against the Kraken. You had Backlund, Zeri back with Backlund and Coleman. You had Frost and Farabee, the new acquisitions, together with Igor Sharangovich. And then you had, and I know people are upset that Kevin Rooney is still sitting on the 4th line. I'm going to explain this to people as clearly as I can. Kevin Rooney, Ryan Lomberg, Martin Pospisil with Adam Clackby at the extra forward. Dan, I think we both agree on this. If there was a better 4th line center in this organization than Kevin Rooney, he would play. But Clark Bishop didn't work there. Justin Kirkland is hurt. They've had other injuries as well. The reality is no matter how much people are complaining about Kevin Rooney being on the 4th line center, they don't have an option. And I'm going to get to something else about this. We'll talk about this when we talk about Craig Conroy a little bit later. But ultimately, they don't have anybody better than Kevin Rooney. And I know I see all these tweets. There's got to be somebody better than Kevin Rooney. There's not, unfortunately.
I think we need to qualify that. There's nobody better as a 4th line center. I do think Rory Cairns is better, but he's not your 4th line center. And right now, you want to keep him in the American League to play top line minutes as opposed to play your 4th line center role. I've talked about a lot on your show and our show. You don't just put anybody anywhere in your lineup. I'm a big believer that when you're the GM, you call up the guy who you think should fill that role, right? You call up a different guy for a top 6 call up than a bottom 6 call up, than a fourth line call up. I think they've tried. I mean, they tried, Kieran's, they've tried Bishop. Like you said, they're kind of run out of centermen. I guess you could try Sam Morton, but I'm not convinced that Morton is ready yet. So, yeah, I mean, until somebody else can show they can do this, Rooney's what you've got.
Yeah. Yeah, and I get it. People are frustrated, but he's the best of what they got, unfortunately. But this is a first year of a rebuilding team, and that's why you have a Kevin Rooney in your lineup.
And that's what I was just about to say is, in the end, why does it matter, right? I mean, it's not like Kevin Rooney by himself is going to tank some, Stanley Cup chance for this team.
Right. Or I mean,
he doesn't look good. He's 31. He's done at the end of the year. So we ride him out and we say goodbye.
Yep. That's pretty much it. That's it. Like, there doesn't need to be anything more than this.
Let's just say that if they needed to fix that role, I'm sure that a fourth line center would have been a fairly cheap acquisition cost. But to me, there's no point in paying it right now. If they were in a different spot with this team and he was the only issue, I would have paid the 5th, 4th, whatever to acquire that position. Right now, there's no point, in my opinion, of spending the asset to upgrade that position.
No, there's really not for someone like Derek Ryan was available on waivers, but there was no need to put in a 38-year-old center to replace Kevin Rooney. Like, there's no need to do it. So, and I mean, maybe we'll dig into this. I think that the other thing, and I think that this is something that I think the Flames deserve some credit for, is they have pretty much held firm on their belief of what they need. They're not going out of their way from it. They made the one trade for Morgan Frost and Joel Farabee, but those are two players that were in their age range, right? That they were looking for, between the 22 and 26-year-olds. Yep. They haven't veered from that. They have not veered from their conviction of what they know that they need. And
not just in the age range, but I think also remembering the contracts on those, right? I mean, Farabee a little expensive, maybe at $5 million, but he's locked up long term. Frost are an RFA, like they're in the age range, but they're also under team control for a while.
Yeah, and that's what they're looking for. And again, nobody is calling nobody. I've seen some people criticize this trade, but nobody is saying that Morgan Frost and Joel Farabee are going to automatically hand the Flames, get them into the playoffs. But I think both of those guys are competent NHL players, and you need competent NHL players. And I have actually liked Morgan Frost a lot. I think he's done I think all things considered, I think I could see more to the end of the year, even next year. I think Morgan Frost's role will increase. I think that I could see him taking some of those Michael Backlund minutes that Backlund has used for all of those years, right? So
sorry, go ahead.
He's not an elite number one center,
but
the Flames need more than an elite number one center. I would have argued before that trade, I would argue they need 3 centers.
Sure. And I think a lot of fans, and we'll talk about this, I think, later as well, put this, notion that if you have one elite center, the Stanley Cup is yours for all of eternity. We might as well just rename it the Harvey the Hound Cup because it'll be ours forever. That's not happening. Look at Edmonton's got an elite center. They haven't won it, right? I mean, Sid hasn't won it every year. That's not the be all end all. And, you have to build a 23-man roster. And I agree with you. Frost is not a number one center, but nor does Frost have to be a number one center.
No, he doesn't. Nope.
And everyone that's criticized this trade that I've seen, nobody has any real rhyme or reason why. Look at what the Flames gave up. So they gave up a guy who they would have had to pay somebody to take, right? They gave up a guy in Peltier who has had some ups and downs, looking better, but you have to give to get. And they gave up a pick that, they've got a lot of them. I have yet to see anyone who's criticizing this trade that I can actually see their point. This is a great deal for the Flames. You need bodies. You got good bodies. You gave up almost, in my opinion, you gave up almost nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. Yeah, just so kind of where they are right now is they're 3 points behind Vancouver for for that final playoff spot. They're 5 points behind the Kings for being in third, and they're 3 points being out of the top 10. So they're in a situation where they could end up anywhere, really. In my opinion, Dan, I mean, I think that we have been waiting for this fade for most of the season. I think that the fade has started. I don't think the Flames make the playoffs. I'll just go on record and saying that. But what I hope is I hope they battle hard to make the playoffs. And I hope that we're going to have this 6-game road trip, and it's going to be a tough road trip. And I think, I'm not expecting anything out of this, but I just want to see the players that need to grow start to grow, like the Connor Zaries, the Morgan Frost, the Matt Coronados, even the Kevin Balls, who are in a very new situation, being in a top 4 role, right? Like and then Dustin Wolf, right? Those guys, if they can make some steps, learning what it's like to play in a higher intense level of hockey, which is going to be now, I think this helps the development of the Flames as much as trying to get this Lord and Savior top 10 pick.
Yeah, I mean, Conroy has built this team to compete, and he said that right from the beginning, and I think we've seen that all year, right? And there's always those fans that want this team just tank, get the top pick, tank. Conroy is expecting them to compete. I think Huska is expecting them to compete. I have no doubt this team will compete for the playoffs. Now, are there ways to sort of, I don't know, help yourself along to a top 10? Sure. Maybe, again, you dress a player or dress a player you normally wouldn't and scratch a player you normally wouldn't and give someone a chance. Not that you're trying to tank, but, maybe at some point you take a guy out of the lineup and put another guy in to give him a shot. But even then, I think they're going to expect them to be competitive with what they've got. Everything in their DNA, and if we look at how they're built and how they played, not every game's been great, but I think the Flames are, when we look at the season overall, Kevin, I think that they're competing. I don't see that changing.
How many times have we talked about the Flames having a poor effort this year?
I mean, game by game?
Yeah, I don't think...
I think there's been a few stretches here where they've looked terrible, but that's to be expected for a team that is with the roster they have.
But looking terrible and having a terrible effort are two different things.
I think they had bad efforts in that St. Louis stretch. I think they had some bad efforts coming into this break at the end of January when they had that when they were playing Winnipeg, when they were playing Washington. I thought they had some bad efforts, and then that whole next week with Toronto, Colorado, and Seattle, I didn't think the effort was great. But again, I mean, this is a team that, let's be honest, is not an NHL defense. All right, if you're going to go very far, as you mentioned, you need some forwards. I think that they're giving the best effort they can on most nights with what they've got.
Yeah,
and show me a team that looks great for 82 games.
Yeah.
It's a long season.
Yeah, it is. And I think with Dustin Wolf specifically, just kind of, I think I think I kind of came to the conclusion, watching Dustin Wolf, he looked probably fatigued. But I think the other thing to kind of just note here is this is a growing experience for Dustin Wolf that I think he's going to solve. I precursed this saying this. What he's going to solve the fact that teams are getting a little bit of a book on him too, the more that he plays. And I think Dustin Wolf's going to learn that, but also the rigors of this, he's played long seasons in other leagues, but he hasn't played a long season in the NHL. And that's just a new challenge, right? It's a growth thing. And he's probably, Ryan Huska said, if we need to play Dustin Wolf 15 games in a row, we're going to play Dustin Wolf 15 games in a row. This is a new for him too, that he's going to be sort of built in this spotlight. So it's another learning curve that if he learns from it and he's better for it, the organization is better for it.
You said this is something he's trying to solve for. What's the problem?
Sorry, say that again.
You said this son he'll solve for. What's the problem?
Well, it's not a problem. Well, it's a challenge, right? It's a new challenge that he
Sure,
hasn't.
but it is for any rookie goalie.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, this is not a unique problem to Dustin Wolf. This is welcome to the NHL, kid. I mean, we see this with any, whether you're a forward, whether you're a goaltender, you know, everyone needs to adjust to the NHL level. I think in some ways, Calgary Flames fans have put unrealistic expectations on Dustin Wolf, because the last time we had a goaltender come in and we had a subpar team, that guy put them on his shoulders and ran them all the way to the finals in Kiprusoff. And I think that some people are expecting him to do the same, and I think that's unfair to Dustin Wolf. He's good. Yeah. He has growing pains. Every young goaltender has growing pains. You know, I think, thank goodness that he's coming into a team that he can grow into, and he's not expected to, all right, kid, we got a Stanley Cup team. You're backstopping it. Good luck. If we don't make it, it's your fault, right? Like, he needs time to grow like anybody else. And you know, like when you're saying they got a book on him, every team has professional video scouts. This is what they do. So every goalie they're going to figure out.
Yeah, exactly. This is the best league in the world. It's the National Hockey League. People are going to be prepared for him. I know. Like, don't get me wrong, Dustin. I'm not criticizing Dustin Wolf. I'm just pointing out that there are new challenges ahead for Dustin Wolf.
For sure.
This is part of the rebuilding process. And, you know, I think that there's also a lot of fans that think that just you can walk into this league and you can dominate this league. And it's just not, that's not a realistic expectation to have about somebody. It is a league that you like. I've said this before. I think 95% of the players that have been drafted need AHL or development time before they're in the league. I think it's very rare. I even think that you could make the argument. I mean, Connor Bedard is a franchise elite center, but I think you look at Connor Bedard, he's been put in a very awkward situation. He's in a major market. He needs to be a face of a franchise that is not only an on-ice disaster, it's been an off-ice disaster.
Yeah.
It put him in a Winter Classic. Like,
I was talking to somebody about this over the break, and they said, what if the NHL changed the minimum age to play to 20? That would force you to keep these guys somewhere else for a couple of years.
Yeah. Well, the CHL, NHL, and AHL need to come to some sort of agreement that players like a player like Zane Parekh can go to the AHL, because you're like the CHL is probably not going to. It's not. They're too good for it, but they're not good enough for the NHL. They need to come to some sort of agreement.
And I think you could say, you know, we don't want you rating all your talent, right? But okay, every team's allowed one guy every year, if he was drafted in the top 2 rounds or something, that you're allowed to have exceptional status for.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be all our 20. We're going to rate all our 20-year-olds and send them down there. But okay, you get one guy you draft in the top 2 or 3 rounds who you can declare exceptional status for. And you know what? I think one thing you could do to make some other hockey leagues more competitive, you can send one of those guys to the ECHL as well.
Yeah, that's possible too.
You know, I think there could be, the ECHL could have a neat niche if they're kind of the place you go for a year, almost as your finishing school before you go to the AHL.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Dustin Wolf has looked great at every level he's at. He's looking great as a Flames goalie. I think it's unfair to expect him to, you know, be the next Mika Kiprusoff and take this team on his shoulders and run all the way. Yes, he's had some challenges. Who hasn't? Show me a Flame this year who has not had some challenges, right? Like, this is Dustin's chance to learn this and to make mistakes and to grow from those mistakes.
Yeah. And I think that we need to understand the other thing that I think that needs to be said here. When we say competitive, I don't think that they mean Stanley Cup contender competitive.
No.
They know that this team needs to rebuild, if we could use that word. But I also think that this, you know, the danger that has happened in a number of these other situations is the effort has been less than exceptional. And I think the Flames are like, no, we need an effort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to me, putting in an effort just means the opposite of tanking, right? I don't think anyone expected this team coming in to make the playoffs. I don't even think we expect them to be, I know I didn't, 3 points out of the playoffs. What I expect them to do is put in the effort, learn from this, and let these young guys grow, right?
Yeah.
And you know, And whether growing means getting better or not. I mean, we talked about forward lines earlier. Postel's back on the fourth line. We've seen him on the first line. Who is he? Maybe growing does not necessarily mean he gets better, but we understand what he is as a player, and that's important too.
Yeah.
Pachal, if we were running for the Stanley Cup, we would not have given Braden Pachal the chances he's had to become what he is, right? To me, being competitive just means going out there and giving it what you've got so we understand better what these pieces are.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And just understanding what and the identity of this team going forward and what they want to build. Like, it's easy, like people talk about the draft picks and all of this and that's great, but what are you building to? Like, what type of players are you drafting? Who is the Calgary Flame?
And I think also allowing guys, even veteran guys, to make mistakes. I mean, we have to admit that Jonathan Huberdeau's looked a lot different this year than last year. And I think it's because he didn't have the pressure and he was allowed to make mistakes. And he was allowed to try new things in his game. And to me, that's part of that being able to compete and not saying, okay, you've just got to go out and do this thing because we need to be in the playoffs. It's about, all right, we want to, this wasn't working. Let's try this. Okay, that worked. Let's keep doing that. Like, and you've got the right coach for that, I believe. The Flames just need these guys to go out there and give it their all and go from there.
I would argue that Jonathan Huberdeau has been the most improved Flame this year.
Yeah, I would agree.
I mean, it's not been outstanding, but it's not been everything. And
it hasn't been outstanding, but it hasn't needed to be outstanding.
Nope. I think like a couple of years ago when these trades happened, when Calgary and Huberdeau happened, I think everybody was hoping, and I think even the Flames organization was hoping this was Monahan and Goodrow, and it just didn't pan out that way because their names are Calgary and Huberdeau, not Monahan and Goodrow.
Yep. But, and I mean, talking about, improvements and being competitive, look at Coronado, right? Spent most of the year in the American League last year, now a first line right winger. Like, you've allowed him to make those mistakes and have those challenges and work his way up the lineup. And I think, we've got a better piece because of it. I think Connor Zary, same thing. He's been allowed to work and grow and be a winger and a center and understand what works and what doesn't. That's what was important this year.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm with you. So let's because I think we're building off some of the commentary that we've heard on social media through various podcasts, videos, and things like that. And I kind of want to spend some time here kind of responding to some of the issues that are out there with the Flames or the perceptions that are out there. Which the first one is the need that they don't have elite talent. And of course, you even heard that, oh man, it would be great if look at Nathan McKinnon. Wouldn't it be great if the Flames have elite talent? They do need elite talent. I don't think that anybody has argued that. They don't have elite talent, but you also need depth to win. You do not win with elite talent and elite talent alone. You need depth up and down the lineup. You look back. I mean, if you want to talk about all those teams that have top 10 picks or top picks in their drafts and on their Stanley Cup roster, look at the depth and look at the drafts around the build and look at the drafts that they've done after the second round of how they built the team. It's not just elite talent. Elite talent gets you tickets in the door, but it doesn't guarantee you a Stanley Cup. The Tampa Bay Lightning, you look at the Pittsburgh, you talked about the Pittsburgh Penguins. They've had Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin. They should have had a dynasty. They won 2 in a row.
Mm-hmm. I think even the modern day version of that is the Tampa Bay Lightning, right? Who were either winning or really competitive for years. And that was a team I would say arguably didn't have, the superstar player. It was a committee.
Yeah. They had, they set the record for points in 2018 and were swept in the first round of the playoffs.
Even look at last year's winner, right? I think that a big reason Edmonton didn't win last year is they don't have a full roster of NHL-ready players, and Florida did. And Florida got something they needed from everybody. And even a guy like Ryan Lomberg, who didn't play a ton, played his part to get there.
Yeah.
You know, and this is one thing I think fans don't look at is they want the one big name. And, you know, you look at other sports, you know, you look at, say, football, you can get away with winning often because you've got the one really good quarterback, just a bunch of big dudes in front of him. You know, in baseball, you can often get away with one really good pitcher and one really good batter, you know, and a marginal lineup around them in a lot of ways. Like, you know, I think fans want that to be the case in hockey, and it's not. And yes, the Flames maybe don't have the elite guy, but let's build all the other pieces right now while we can.
Yeah. And that's the important part of this is it's not just about how you draft in the first, it's about how you draft in each round, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
I would also go ahead.
Well, I think that people forget that there's going to be mistakes and things that happen that just simply don't work out. Like if you look at part of the problem with the Buffalo Sabres, actually, if you look at the Buffalo Sabres, Dan, they've drafted they have done a fantastic job of drafting.
Mm-hmm.
But they have poorly developed players, and they do not have a culture where players want to stick around. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's about the palm trees, Dan.
No,
I
think that's part of it, but I think you'll overlook that if you're successful, right? I think the wife, the kids, they want to live in a nice place. But I mean, heck, if Winnipeg goes all the way, guys are going to say, I don't want to go to Winnipeg to not win the thing I've played my whole life for. You'll go there and you'll suffer through it for a couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, Scheifele and Hellebuck signed long-term in Winnipeg, and, you know, they don't even have an airport, reportedly.
Yeah, you know, I mean, you know, and if you look at the other thing I think we have to look at too is, yes, you need high-end talent. You don't necessarily have to draft it. I mean, one of the most impactful players for Florida last year is Matthew Tkachuk, who was not their draft pick.
Nope.
Right? Like you can bring this talent in from other places when the time is right.
Yes.
And remember that Matthew Tkachuk played 1 year in Florida. Like he was a Calgary Flame up until last year. Right. So he went in for 1 year and got the cup and looks good again this year. Like you don't necessarily need this guy to be, you know, born and bred and, you know, bleeding the sea of red.
No, I mean 2 years because I mean he took Florida to the final against Vegas and then
right. Yeah.
Yeah. So 2 seasons. This is his third year in there. I mean,
so, you know, like, yes, they need a star, but you know, at the other side, Kevin, we can find just as many times that a team has had a top draft pick and it hasn't turned out. Right?
Yeah.
Like just because you get that top 10 pick doesn't necessarily mean, do you want me to go through some of the names that, you know, people were excited about since 2000 and haven't turned out to be that star?
Go for it.
2005, Gilbert Brulé, drafted number 6 by Columbus. Number 6 in 2008, also by Columbus, Nikita Filatov. Nel Yakupov, number 1 by Edmonton. Even a guy like Taylor Hall, right? Drafted high. Yes, he's an NHLer. I don't think any of us would say that he was ever that star player that took any team on their back. Nico Hischier, good NHLer, not that star player that, you know, has really come out that way. Like, you know, yes, you have a chance to get that guy, but you also have a chance, I bet if we look at some of these teams, to find that guy in the second round as well, or even later in the first round. Like, I think sometimes fans put way too much emphasis on, oh my God, you know, it has to be a top 10 or we'll never get better.
Yeah, I mean, I think people forget Jack Eichel was a trade from Buffalo to Vegas. Sidney Crosby, people forget this. I just need to remind everybody, that was the year of the lockout. Pittsburgh did not tank for Sidney Crosby. They won a lottery draft pick for Sidney Crosby. Like, and
even Edmonton, who I would say has tanked for picks. How's that turned out for them?
Well, this is their second time through it because the first one was an absolute disaster.
And even now, I mean, they've made it to the end. They made it to the finals. They haven't won them. Like, you know, how many kicks of the can do you get before McDavid said, I'm out of here?
I sidebar, I do wonder if this is the year that I think we're going to be a little angry that the others win the cup. There's a part of me that just wonders that, but anyway.
Could be. I mean, you know, look at teams like New York, right? I mean, I think it's been a long time since the Rangers have had that elite player that they drafted, but I would say they've consistently had good teams that they put together from strong picks. Dallas, right? Dallas, the model Calgary's used as a team they want to look at. Dallas, I don't think since Mike Modano has had a star player they drafted, but they've got really good guys.
Miro Heiskanen would be one, but they don't they've drafted very consistently.
Yeah, and they're getting that talent throughout. And I think we're getting away from, fans love the superstar. Media loves the superstar, right? The guy that you can put your hat on and say, this is my guy, and get his name on your jersey. But like you said, I think we have to remember that we need all these players together to make this work, right? We need everybody to be playing the best they can. And even a guy like Matvei Gradin, who the Flames got late in the draft, I think is going to turn into something. Will he be a superstar? Maybe not, but I don't think he needs to be. And I don't know that the one superstar is as important as he used to be.
I mean, it's a team game. But Igor Shesterkin, by the way, is a 4th-round pick in the 2004 NHL entry draft.
Yep.
And he's I would argue he's the face of that franchise. I mean, he was paid like one, right? So,
I mean, even look at Boston. Yeah, they've taken a step back this year, but they had some great players and, haven't won the cup in, years. So just because you have great players doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win.
Yeah. You've got a 1 in 32 shot at winning the Stanley Cup every year. And I think the teams that do it, they're not all done the same way, but I mean, nobody's saying you don't need elite talent, but you build it through different ways. It's not.
Yeah. And I don't think the Flames need it now. Like, fans want them to tank and get this guy now. What's the rush? Why do we need this guy next year?
And this draft, from everything that I understand, is not a great draft, which we just take a pause here because I was doing some thinking about this. If the Montreal Canadiens do not select this pick for this draft, I think it's essentially an unprotected pick next year. Because I think the way I understand it, I think you understand it the same way. The Canadiens take the higher of the Flames Panthers pick next year. And there's a reasonable chance, looking at this team, that they're a top 10. They will be in the top 10 next year too, right? So
when you're saying top 10, you're saying drafting the top 10 or drafting 20 to 30 or 20 to 30, 22 to 32?
My understanding of this is they take the highest of the Flames or the Panthers pick. Whoever is the higher of the two picks.
So the higher meaning the closest to 32. So if you have a number 10 and number 20, you'd give up your number 20.
So if the Flames picked first and the Panthers picked second, the Canadiens would pick the Flames pick.
Okay.
So
generally we call that the
lowest,
pick, right? Yeah. Well, that's why I wanted to clarify, because generally you would think of one as the lowest. Well, I guess you can look at it either way, right? One can be the first pick, so it's the highest pick, or you could say it's the lowest pick. So that's what we got to clarify there.
Yeah. But that draft next year is reportedly a better draft than this year. And that's the other thing that people are not talking enough about. Just because there's a top 10 pick in a draft doesn't mean that would be a top 10 pick in every draft.
Yeah. Well, I think some of those names I read out, right, were the best player available, but not necessarily the best players.
Yeah. Yeah. Brian Burke has often talked about the Sedin, when he pulled off the Daniel and Henrik Sedin, which was 2 and 3. He has often talked about the reason that he was able to pull that trade off was how bad that draft was that year.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you have to also take that into context with this as well. It's not just about, we've got a top 10, it's not top 10 pick. There's a lot to it. And we'll talk about the latest top 10 pick with the Flames here in a moment. But the other perception is they've been.
Sorry, while we're on that, Kevin, I've said this on our show, and I still stand to this, is if there's you don't need that top guy this year. This is going to
No.
be a 3, 4, 5-year rebuild. So why be bad now? Like, let's let these guys try this. Let's let them run. Let's let them attempt to make the playoffs. If they do, great. If they don't, great too. Like, let's let them, have a run at this, see what they can do. And we can always find that last guy later on. We can find that next year, the year after that. I think the Flames they're not going to be in the same level every year. They're not going to be, this tweener team every year. And I think next year they'll probably do even worse. But I think that, there's not a rush to get that guy. Let's build the team around him, build some great chemistry, and then almost drop that player in a year or two.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even like you said, get the guy next year, put him in the A for a year or two. Like, to me, there's not an immediate need. It's not like we're one elite centerman away from hoisting Lord Stanley's mug.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes time.
It takes time. And again, anyone who's saying that, they want them to get this number 1 pick, and I get it, and I understand that. Go back and look at some of the best teams in the league and look at where their players came from, right? If we look at Vegas, Jack Eichel, their number 1 center, is not a pick of theirs. Thomas Hertl, not a pick of theirs, right?
No.
Those are guys they've acquired. Look at even Dallas, Rupe Hintz, not a number 1 pick. Matt Duchene, not their pick, right? Like, Michael Granlund, not their pick. So, I think that you can't just assume that getting the top pick solves all these problems. Look at Winnipeg, Vladislav Nemesnikov, not their pick, right? Ehlers, Niederreiter, like some of these guys were their picks, but not necessarily the top 1 or 2 or 3. And, you've got to draft well throughout and build that whole lineup. And the Flames are starting that, but none of these teams that we just talked about either were built in a season.
Oh, and it takes time to, and I think I knew the other unfortunate part of this, and I mean, Conway was part of the organization, so I guess he gets some criticism for it. But I also don't I think that you can't blame. I don't know if it's fair to completely criticize Conroy and this new way that they're doing things and kind of compare what happened with Treliving and what happened with Feaster and all of these things before, right? This is a different time. Like
the past is the past.
Yeah. And the Flames tried the rebuild. They went 6 years, or they had a 5-year stretch not making the playoffs, and they drafted like crap.
Yep.
Under Jay Feaster. Like Brian Burke literally took over and literally said that Jay Feaster did not do a good job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know what? Show me a team that has been great from every GM in their history, right? Like the Flames have their blemishes, the Young Gun years, the Jay Feaster years. Like, show me a team that's been successfully successful, right? Detroit's had ups, Detroit's had downs, Boston's had up, Boston's had downs. Even teams that were here since we came in, right? I mean, Winnipeg came in the same time Calgary did. Edmonton came in the same time Calgary did. Those teams have not been successful every year either. Like, you have ups, you have downs. You can't blame it's like, if you buy a house from the 1980s and has a leak, you can't blame the current owner for that necessarily, right? You can't blame the last owner of the team or last GM for all your problems.
Yeah, it's
right. I mean, if Conroy had a time machine and he could go back to, 1980 and do things differently, I'm sure he would. But from the team that he inherited, I think he's done a fantastic job.
He has. By the way, Connor Hellebuck was a 5th-round pick in 2012.
I mean, and we talked about Wolf earlier, right? A 7th-round pick. Like, sometimes the best players are not, the top draft pick.
Yeah. And this is an organization that the 3 faces of this organization, the 4 faces of this organization.
Before we go any further, Rupe Hintz, right? Number 1 center in Dallas, 49th overall pick. Like, a great pick. And arguably they would not be where they were without him. Not necessarily your top 5, not even your top 30.
The 4 faces of this franchise: Lanny McDonald, Johnny Gaudreau, Mika Kiprusoff, Jerome McGinley. 3 of them were acquired by trade, and Gaudreau was a 4th-round pick.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but if you look at the guys in the rafters, right? Vernon, really the only guy up there that the Flames drafted.
And Al McInnes, well, he's not up there, but he should be up there.
Well, technically, I mean, he's forever a Flame, right?
Yeah.
Nieuwendyke's up there too, but yeah, it depends how you look at things.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, there's been, the Flames drafted Brett Hull, right? The Flames drafted J.S. Jaguar, guys that they've had good picks. And I mean, arguably Brett Hull, I mean, wanted out for whatever reason, and you got to move him. Like, you can't, I've seen a lot of players online too. Oh, the Flames should trade Kadri. I was talking to someone on Twitter through the Fireside Chat account. The Flames should move Kadri to Buffalo for Cousins. Well, Kadri's got a no trade. How are you convincing him to go there? Like, we're not playing on our Xbox here. We can't just change history. We've got to deal with the pieces we have and the conditions of those deals. If you can tell me a great way to sell Buffalo to Kadri, let's do it. But as you mentioned earlier, hey, you want to go to a place that doesn't know how to handle their talent, that fumbles everything?
Yeah.
We'll happily send you there. If I was him, I'd say, no, I don't want to go there. Why would I want to go there? Right? Like, we have to admit, and yes, maybe you could debate he shouldn't have a no trade. And that's a great debate, but it is what it is, right? He has the deal he has. We got to work with it.
Yeah.
But if anybody has an idea of how to send him to Buffalo and get him to convince there, tweet the Flames. I'm sure they'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. And most of the people that are tweeting are not living in Buffalo. And
I mean, even if you're not, maybe you're a Buffalo expert and you're not living there, but you've still got to remember that, you often will have to convince these guys because they have that no trade. And how are you going to do that? Why would someone want to do that? So if you don't, then you're, I keep hearing Dylan Cousins' name coming out. So if you can't convince your top players to want to go there, then what pieces would we have to send for Cousins?
Yeah.
I mean, they're not taking Rooney and, Mirmanov and Mr. Considerations.
Yeah. That's future considerations to you, by the way. Oh.
Well, at what point does he become present considerations? Like, at some point we have to consider them.
Yeah.
And do you have to report to the league when you made that consideration? Do you have to call the league and say, I considered Montreal today?
Wasn't there there was a trade? Gregory Denisenko was traded to from that future considerations was traded again.
Yeah, I don't even know who owns Mr. Considerations rights at this point, but the deadline's coming, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But if you eat Montreal smoked meat, you have to call the league and say, I had a delicious sandwich and I thought about Montreal today. And somebody says, all right, consideration's been made. Like, it's, I don't know. They say you can't trade for nothing, but yet you can.
Yeah, you can't trade. Yeah, like you have to have something in there, but but
you don't. I mean, a consideration is nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I think even if you get traded for a bag of pucks, at least you're traded for something.
Yeah, for sure. Let's get to that part of it here. I think the expectation, I mean, if the Flames keep losing, if the Flames lose, we're going to see more of this. So the expectation to trade Andersons, the Kadris, the Colemans, I mean, I think the drama will go out for the Backlunds, the Uyghurs, all of the vets. Trade the vets, I guess, is the easiest way to make this argument. Is first of all, I think you and I have had the discussion of Rasmus Andersson. I'm still not there at trading Rasmus Andersson. Like, I know that there's a lot of people that think that this is going to be a 8-year big contract. And probably a little bit of an overpay. Like, ideally, I kind of want him, even with the cap going up, I kind of would like to keep him. I think there's an argument to try to keep him within Uyghur money if he can. And I know that there's a lot of people. I do see the argument though that he would probably get more as a free agent. I think to me, Kevin, that Andersson and Backlund, especially, you do whatever they want to do. If Backlund comes to you and says, "Guys, I want to go win a cup," you honor that and you move him. Yeah,
I think if Andersson comes to you and says, "Guys, I want to get out of here. I don't want to go through the rebuild. I tried it. It's not for me." You move on from him. But I don't think that you're out there shopping either one of those guys.
No.
And even, look at teams in rebuild. Look at all these teams, whoever fans want to point to for a rebuild. the best ones have always had veteran pieces. You don't have a bunch of 18-year-old guys who can't go to the bar and go to bed at 9:30 on road trips. Like, you need to have, late 20s guys, early 30s guys. You got to have the veterans to show them how this works. And I see no reason why you want to move those players, because again, if you look in the cupboards, it's going to be hard to replace those players. And I don't know that you're going to get what you think you're going to for all of them.
Yeah, that's the other thing. We'll get to the perceived replacement for Anderson in a second. With Kadri, the challenge is going to be, even with the cap going up, I don't know if anybody is going to take that whole salary.
He's 34. Who's going to want to take that on until 28?
Yeah, that's a tough trade.
And again, I don't think it needs to be. I don't think he needs to be traded.
Don't either.
Is Kadri an NHLer?
Yes.
Yes. Is Kadri a liability to this team?
He has defensive deficiencies. I think it's
sure.
But
if you have two young players, like, last year's quote unquote Kadri and the kids, right? Can he help build talent on this team?
Yes, he can, actually.
Then keep him around.
Yeah, and I mean,
that's the question I'm asking if I'm GM. I mean, I applied for the GM job. They obviously didn't hire me, but that's what I'd be looking at is he valuable? Maybe he's not worth $7 million. Maybe he's not my first-line center. I think a 38-year-old Nazem Kadri is your third-line center who can prop up some young players is still valuable, so keep him around.
Yeah. Then Blake Coleman, who is a UFA in 28. I mean, although it's 33,
Blake Coleman is a different type of player. I could
see him being traded next year. What's that?
I could too. Yeah, I could see Coleman be traded, but I could just as easily see Coleman sticking around. I don't think you have to trade him next year. I think you definitely, if he doesn't want to come back, trade him in his last year, 26, 27. But if you get the right deal, I think you move Coleman. But you're not, again, I don't think you're out there shopping.
No. And then Rasmus Anderson, I mean,
even if Coleman said to the Flames, hey, I want to come back, I'd bring him back.
Yeah.
I think Anderson's the guy you get something for, but I don't know if you actually help your organization losing your number one defenseman.
Well, this leads to the other conversation that I think that people are getting. There's good reason to be excited about Zane Parekh because he is producing at a record pace in the OHL. And don't get me wrong, that's exciting. And it sounds like he understands what it's going to take to get into the National Hockey League. And I do believe he's going to be an NHLer, Dan. But where I'm concerned or confused or why I want to push back is I don't believe that you should be building a franchise around a guy that has not played one NHL game. And I get the hype, but you still need to see him in the National Hockey League.
I mean, let's talk about the worst case scenario there. You trade away Anderson, you trade away Weegar. Now you're saying Parekh is the man. Parekh comes in, blows out his knee first year, and now you've got what? Bean and Pakal as your top, or Soloviev and Poirier is your top two. Like, I agree with you. Keep, even if Pakal comes in, and even if he's wonderful, and even if he's the next Cale Makar, the next Al McInnes, or the next whoever your favorite best defenseman in the world is, Ray Bourque, he still needs somebody to play with. So keep Anderson here to be that guy.
Yeah. And I mean, I know that everybody is also excited because the depth on this blue line in terms of prospects is pretty solid. You got Hunter Brzkevich hanging around. You've got Poirier. You've got Soloviev. We've talked about Yan Kuznetsov. There is pieces here, but they're not all going to be developing at the same time. And they're not all going to be what everybody is projecting.
They're not. Even if they are, they're going to take time to get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Even a guy like Hunter Brzkevich, I think, you're not going to see him come in next year and immediately he's top 4. I think he's going to take time to get there. And I think even Zane Parekh, I don't know is going to translate as well the NHL game. And we've already seen Zane Parekh a lot of times coming out and, not looking great as a defensive defenseman. He's a great offensive guy. I think he needs work on his defensive side. And I think there's going to be some work that has to be put in for that. And I think he's going to take some time to adjust to being a top 2 guy because of that.
Yeah. Like, kind of when I don't know if this is a fair comparison, but the cautionary tale to me is Evan Bouchard in Edmonton, who has some dynamic offensive skills, but you do see at times there's still complaints about his defensive game. I could see that with Parekh at the start, that's something that Parekh could struggle with. Now, could he be a franchise elite top 5 defenseman? We hope so, but I don't think that's a realistic expectation. And that's sort of, I think, the other problem with this argument is there all of this top 10 pick that's coming, and you bought him out for all of these picks, and they're not going to be the franchise saviors you think that they are. Because
and again, even if they might be, I think it's going to take time.
Yeah. Look at Quinn. A good example of this is Quinn Hughes in Vancouver, who everybody was excited about Quinn Hughes, and there's no question about it. Like, he's been a dynamic piece for the Canucks since the start, but he's not the same player that he was when he started.
Yep.
I mean, he wasn't able to grow facial hair when he started, as an example.
I think sports have got to the point where fans are just excited by trades and moves, and everybody wants to see a trade every day if they could. Trade. And I think sometimes we have to just, there's that old saying, you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them, right? And I think right now, fans, especially if you're a fan of the Flames, you got to hold them until you better understand what's in your hand. And I'm not certain right now what's in the Flames' hand. Like you said, there's a lot of good talent. There's a lot of good prospects. Who knows what's there? But why are we moving every piece out? I'm not saying don't make a move. If the right move comes up, you take it. But I don't think you're out there shopping your veterans.
Yeah. I mean,
if you're over 26, out you go. Like, that's the wrong way to look at this.
And I think people need to understand this about the trade deadline, as I think we're going to have all these rumors of they're shopping this guy and this guy. Everybody's going to ask about everybody because that's the way of the trade deadline, but you're not trading everybody even if the Flames do fade out of this race, they're not trading Kadri, Coleman, and Anderson at the trade deadline. Like, I don't expect that. Like, that's not a reasonable expectation. And I know.
Well, no, it's not. And, anytime somebody says they want to trade those guys, my question is, what are you getting back? And, who's going to make that deal with you? And remember, you can't this is not, Craig the Conqueror just goes to Buffalo and says, you shall take my garbage and you shall give me a top prospect. Like, what are you getting back, and why does that team want to do the deal? And that's where people can't answer that question.
Yeah. And if you're trading Kadri, I mean, you're playing Kevin Rooney higher in the lineup.
Yeah. But again, Kadri has a no movement deal. So convince me why Kadri's going to waive that. Like, take all these things into consideration when we're fantasy booking.
And with Kadri too, if you remember back when he signed, he took forever to sign that year because he was very thoughtful of where he wanted to go. And I think he's also going to be very thoughtful of where he wants to go going forward.
For sure.
I mean, I think there's other personal considerations for Kadri that it's,
But again, okay, so let's just use Kadri. You've mentioned his name a few times. What do you get for Nazem Kadri?
I don't think you're going to get what you think you get for him.
No. So then why move him?
Yeah.
I mean, if he was bad in the dressing room or something like that, sure, move on from him. Right now, I see no reason why you should move on for any of these guys. We could speculate. Dylan Cousins. I don't think he's the answer. I mean, he's a piece. You're not going to get Bedard. You're not going to get, Matvei Michkov. Like, sure, you'll have some pieces maybe, but I just don't see how the Flames are better off by moving these players for where they are in their cycle.
And the Dylan Cousins concern for me ultimately is I don't like that contract, to be honest with you. Let's get to the roster. I'm still not a huge fan of how Puckpedia
The
set
Dylan
everything up,
Cousins
but
deal is 7.1 until 28-29, or sorry, 27-28. So really, it's
No,
the
it's
same length as
20
the.
it's
What's that?
2030. It's
Is it?
2030.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's also younger, though. I mean, if you're willing to have an old Kadri, you could be willing to have an old Cousins, right? They're making about the same money, so I get that. But why does Buffalo want Kadri?
Yeah, what is Buffalo going to benefit from Nazem Kadri, like at this point?
You know, Buffalo probably wouldn't. I mean, you probably don't give him Anderson because I think they've got a good defensive core. So let's just use Dylan Cousins here. So now you're taking guys like Zari out of your roster. You might be taking guys like Coleman out of your roster. And who are you replacing those guys with? Like, I think the assets is going to, again, realistically, looking at contract clauses and stuff like that, you're not giving them Huberto. Like, if you could do a straight up, sure, Kadri for Cousins, maybe. Huberto for Cousins, maybe. It's not going to be that. So are you willing to give up Coronado and Zari? Like, I don't see how this makes the Flames better.
No. And I'm not entirely that contract and the contract and just that contract concerns me where the Flames are at now. And that's the same thing with the people wanting Pedersen. That's an $11.6 million contract with a no movement clause that you're locked into.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that the cap is going up, but I think you still have to be very realistic about what you need to do going forward. And there's a lot of questions around Pedersen, and if it was under 10 million, I think the Flames should have a longer look, but 11.6 is a lot, even in this cap era, for right now, half a point a game player.
And yes,
the
Flames
have to cost Connor Zary.
And yes, the Flames have cap room now, but if you think they're going to go get that elite centerman or draft that guy, you're going to need to pay that guy. You're going to need to pay Dustin Wolf here in a couple of years. Like, I don't think they want to just be spending money for the sake of bringing in a star player now when it's not time. Yeah. Let's get our pieces locked in. Let's give this some time. Fans are not patient. Fans think you can trade your way out of this problem. I don't think you do. I mean, could you? Sure. But I think we saw this 1 year with Treliving too, where, the year they brought in Toffoli and all that, he tried to trade his way into the playoffs and it didn't work. And I think he set the organization back with a number of those trades. Hamannik giving up first, a lot of those things. I know it sucks. I know we want to see progress now. Yes, progress. Flames win. Give it time. Let Conroy do this.
Yeah.
And again, look at any other NHL team. Any other fan base has gone through a rebuild. We really have not.
Not like a true, like
in the 90s, I don't think it was a rebuild. I think it was we're poor.
It was kind of it was the 90s version of rebuild and being poor, but it was marketed as young guns. So
it was marketed as young guns. But I mean, if you look at the picks they were making, I don't think they were trying to get out of that and be competitive. I think they were just trying to, the Canadian dollar. I mean, look at all the Canadian teams that left the league at that point because they couldn't afford to compete, right? Yeah. We lost Quebec. We lost Winnipeg, right? Like, the Flames barely hung on. I don't think they were trying to rebuild. I think they were trying to build what they could afford.
Yeah, I can, like, but at the same time, like, some people are saying we've never rebuilt before. I think the Flames have tried to do some rebuilding. They have drafted since 2012, I would say, 2000, between around there. Since the Sean Monahan pick, anyway, whenever that was. The drafting has certainly improved, but there was a long stretch of this organization's draft history that was very poor.
Daniel Tkachuk, Rico Fata, Danny Sabarin, even Chuck. I mean, Chuck Kobasu, I don't think turned out the way they wanted him to. Eric Nystrom didn't turn out the way they wanted him to. Matt Pelech, Leland Irving.
Yeah.
I mean, and when I say that they're not, I don't think they've really rebuilt. Again, if you look at, let's go back to the 90s here. They made some, I think they were trying to build a team on the cheap, but also I think they were drafting poorly because they weren't spending the money where they needed to be to bring in the right players. And I think that, they may, or the right scouts or, to find the right players. Like, I think this team was, I don't know that I would call that a real rebuild because I don't think that there was I don't think we ever saw the way out of it. I think we were just clawing to survive.
Yeah. Well, there was the Save Our Flames that year too, right?
Yeah.
In that era, right? So
Yeah, and I mean, if you talk to people around there, they said that if 04 didn't happen, then we probably still wouldn't have that team in Calgary.
yeah.
Right. So I don't know. Again, I mean, look at other teams. Look at Winnipeg. Look at Quebec at the time. Right. I mean, everybody was struggling. Edmonton was struggling as well. I think, they had owners that were more patient, and so did Calgary, and that's why they're still around. But, it was hard to be a Canadian team at that point. I think they were just trying to survive.
Yeah. And that could be a challenge that the Canadians teams deal with going forward, depending on the political situation and what happens. We're not going to get into that, but that's a challenge.
I think though, with the CBA and stuff, you're never going to see that kind of disparity again, though, because you now have a league minimum, a league maximum. I mean, I remember one time the Rangers signed Bobby Holik to be the third line centerman, paid him more than Calgary could afford to pay their first line centerman. Like, we're not going to have that kind of disparity anymore.
Yeah, Theo Fleury was massively overpaid by the Rangers that year too.
Yep. And that's it. And those American teams could snipe guys from us just by paying them more, right? Like, I think that we're in, for better or for worse, a parity era of the NHL where if you want to, you can afford to pay anybody. Yeah. How badly do you want them? You can't afford to pay everybody, but you can afford to pay anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
right. Fair. I mean, even look at Toronto, right? I mean, they've got a big name coming off the books this summer. If they want to, they could afford him. They'll make sacrifices, but they'll afford him. If McDavid becomes a free agent, any team could afford him, but you're going to have to give up somebody else. Like, you can afford any player, but not all the players.
Yeah. Yep. It becomes better to that's the other thing. And I guess the other side of this, and I don't know if the Flames should or should not, and I think that this isn't, I don't think that they need to do it this year, but right now they're in good shape to be looking at the offer sheet. They have, I think the point why I think Craig Conroy is doing a good job is they have created enough options for them to build a team, not only in one certain area, which is, I mean, drafting is important. Please, I've always said that, but you can trade, free agents, offer sheets. There's ways to do this. And even the college free agent route, like, I'm not saying that you end up getting your superstar talent there, but you can find some depth in that too, right? So, and I think any depth that you can get within your organization just builds you up here.
Honestly, if the Flames want to go big game hunting, I think wait till the offseason. I still think there's a good chance Marner's available. If you just want to spend some money, go out and don't give up an asset and just drop it on a guy like Marner. Or if Marner goes to Toronto, they're going to have to give up other guys, right? Like, again, that money's got to come from somewhere. Wait until the musical chair's done and spend your money that way.
Well, the name that is being talked about right now as we approach the trade deadline is the new Carolina Hurricane, maybe former Carolina Hurricane, Mikko Rantanen, who is unsure if he's going to sign with Carolina, and may have to make another trade to get that out, to get something for him, because they're not able to sign him, and he could become an unrestricted free agent in the offseason. And I think he's going to be commanding a lot of money, and because he wants Draisaitl money, and his agency he's represented by the same agent that is Leon Draisaitl, so that there is a connection there. But like, yeah, so and again, if that happened, it's hard to argue that how Carolina did not fumble the ball in that trade.
Yeah, and so, I mean, any of these guys, right? Let's just say that, I don't know, let's say that he, Rantanen goes back to Carolina. He's making 4.6 now. He's going to make almost 10. They're currently sitting, I believe they have $500,000 of cap space right now. So they're going to have to move somebody. Like, if you just think the Flames need a big name, I think one will be available because we have cap space, even by, doing the reverse Monahan deal, right? We'll give you future considerations and you will give us your player and a pick. Like, if you just want a big name, if you're just excited to bring in another name here, I think that can be done in the offseason.
Yeah. And I think the Flames are in a position this year to broker a deal. I think that's probably...
I think it's going to be... If we sit here on the 8th of March and say that... And again, we don't know what Conroy talked about, but if we see that other teams are brokering deals and Calgary didn't, I'm going to be disappointed he didn't use the asset.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that they can. That's what I think the Flames need to be doing is broker something because
And that's how you get Rooney out of the lineup too, right? You take on somebody's old, expensive center and stick him on line 4.
yeah. But I mean, ultimately, what Craig Conroy has done, I think the thing that Conroy has done is he's not allowed himself to be pushed around, and he's been patient, and I think that that's a good thing. Like he's not in a rush to get anything done. He wants to make the right thing done. I mean, you even look back at the Markstrom situation, and there was people. I remember people discussing with people on the social media that was like, yeah, "Too bad, Markstrom. I know you have a no trade, but we still have to trade you because it's time." It's like, no, Markstrom signed a contract with a no trade.
Yep.
Right.
And again, you gave him that option, so you've got to respect that.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't know if it's the video game era or what it is, but it seems like more and more people want to see trades. We want to make this trade or make that trade. And I think it's, the NHL video game era, but everybody just wants to see trades all the time.
Yeah. Well, transactions are fun.
They're fun, but at some point, you're not going to sacrifice your team just to see new people.
Yeah.
It's like being in a relationship, right? At some point, you don't just hopefully. I mean, some people do, I guess, but most people don't say, you know what, I'm bored of this person. I'm just going to dump them and find somebody different just because transactions are fun, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you can't go on they can't go on the Love is Blind game and just keep changing relationships.
Yes, they're fun, but they have to be a business decision. And we're not here to move guys around. And again, you're dealing with humans, you're dealing with clauses. Like there's a lot more that goes into this than fans give it credit for.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it seems like so often fans expect that Conroy can just call a guy and say, "Thou shalt make this trade." Like you can, trick the computer on your video game. No, that you need two guys that see a mutual benefit.
Well, I think that's the era, right? I think there's always been an excitement about trades over the years, but I think what is now going on is I think people want to win trades. Like they want to see Dylan Cousins be acquired for a 7th round pick.
I think we've always liked trades for sure, but I think that in the video game era, we're in this there's more people now, I find the last 4 or 5 years that are on Twitter speculating about trades, just throwing names out there because, these are good names, or I did this in my video game. Like I think more people think that they can just, manufacture these trades than we've seen in the past.
Yeah, for sure.
If that makes any sense.
Is there anything else that we should be discussing?
What do you, I guess this might be the last time you and I chat, I don't know, before the deadline. So what do you think the deadline looks like for the Flames?
I think it's going to be quieter than a lot of people expect. I think that they'll broker a deal if they can. If there's a hockey trade should be made, they'll do it. I don't think the names that we were talking about, I don't think any of them happen. I would even be surprised. I mean, the two names that I could see move is Dan Vladar, but you're probably.
I think he's the only thing the Flames have to really give up a value, but I don't know what you get for him unless the goalie gets hurt that much of between now and then.
I honestly think that you would probably be just keep him at that point. And the other one I just wonder about is Daniil Miramanov. Like I wonder if that is a guy they look at moving.
But who wants him?
That's the question.
What team says the last piece we need is a Daniil Miramanov? I think everybody can easily get or has that type of defenseman.
I think the only if I guess for Miramanov on the Miramanov side, if you're a team that is in a rebuilding or a restructuring mode that needs a body or that can have an opportunity to you have him as a project, you could that's a team that I could see. That's a name that I could see going to Buffalo because that's a team that could use the project for him. You've got two right-hand shots. One is a UFA and Henry Yokoharo. San Jose, who took Walker Dewar, could be in. Like, I think one of those teams I could see in the Miramonov conversation.
Next year, I could see it when he's in his last year. I don't think that I want to bring in a guy right now who has one more year as a project.
Yeah.
Like, I think you can easily, I think if you want a project, you could find one for cheaper and or waivers and or UFA.
Yeah. Yeah, probably.
Like, I don't know what the value is to another team who's calling to give it. The only way I could see him moving is if you sort of need that extra piece in a deal. Yeah. And okay, you want a defenseman? Fine. We'll give you Amir Manov. I mean, it's like, in the Farabee deal, and they said, well, we want a seventh because we feel like we need something else.
Yeah. The other guy that I wonder, we've talked about this before, but I'll bring him up again. I do think that Joel Hanley doesn't have an enormous amount of value, but if you're preparing for a long playoff run, the more defensemen that you have, the better it is.
Yeah.
The fact that he's played some top 4 minutes, I think some team could look at that and say, wouldn't hurt to have him if the Flames fade out. If the Flames fade out, I could see that. He's making $787 this year.
I agree.
He's a UFA next year.
Remember,
I think
Trelevino used to like to bring in the random defenseman at the deadline. I think you could definitely see that. I think so. Yeah.
That's a guy I could actually see Toronto making a run at.
We opened the show by talking about Tyson Barrie, Kevin. I think Barrie could be that guy too. And I think you might be trying to get him in shape so he's ready for the deadline. If a team comes and says, I just need a vet, I'll give you a sixth.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another guy I could see. I could see them doing that for too. I mean, his offensive game is still can help you. He's good in the offensive zone. I think that I think Huska played him out of position because he's more of a right shot guy that was playing the left side. And there's some guy, Uyghur can do it. Barrie that's not his strength.
I think in both cases with Huska with Huska and Barrie and, I think that, and when I say both cases, I guess Huska and Barrie and Calgary and whoever might take him to the deadline, you're not bringing them in to be your everyday defenseman. You're bringing them in to be an insurance policy. And I think, whoever would acquire him, you're not bringing them in because you need a number 6. You're bringing them in because you need an 8 or 9. And you go, well, this is a guy who, has won in the past, has been a veteran. I'd rather pull him up than Bob Farm Team if I got an issue.
Yeah. You do need 8. I've always said 8 defensemen is really good if you're expecting to go on a long stand.
And the upper roster limit goes away after the deadline. So you can have as many guys in that roster as you want.
Yeah. But I don't think the Flames are going to be a major piece in the trade deadline. I just don't.
I don't think so. I think anyone who, again, I think fans, and I think part of the reason that, as we're talking about these trades with fans see some success and they see a little bit of success and it's, let's capitalize and let's run for the cup this year. No, don't. I think, like you said, the Flames will stand pat. If I'm Craig, I'm using my ears and not my mouth. And I'm just waiting for teams to come to me and say, you know what, make me an offer. If you want to, dump salary on me, whatever you want, make me an offer. I've made my big trade already with Philly. I'm happy to take the day off.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they should not be. I don't think that they should be a big I would not expect them to be a big name. I mean, I think there's other teams that are going to be heavier involved in those conversations. I don't think it needs to be the Flames.
Nope, I would totally agree with you. I think it definitely doesn't need to be the Flames. It definitely I don't think should be the Flames. I think the Flames can be there as a support, whether that's to take on money or whatever it is that they can do to help support a deal. But I think that you're waiting for teams to come to you and kind of, say, hey, I need you to help me in this way.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. All right. Let's leave it there. You will be back.
Fireside Chat will be back the first Monday of March. So we've taken a break for the 4 Nations. We're going to take a break this week so we can recap this week, and we'll have a new show out on the 3rd of March. Talking about the Flames, the start of the road trip, which you and I really didn't talk about much, and and talking about, how we see the Flames starting off March and what that might mean for their implications in that, precious last playoff spot as they move forward.
The reason we didn't talk about it, though, is I think
we've talked about a lot of stuff.
We talked about a lot of stuff that I think surround this anyway, and I don't think that we should. I think too many people are putting a make or breaker point on this road trip. I think the Flames have a plan in place already.
Yeah, well, and again, I think you have to remember, and this is one thing we say on Fireside Chat all the time, Kevin, is you have to remember what this team is, right? Yes, it's fun that they're within 3 points of the playoffs. There's no expectation they make it, right? No. If they crap the bed on this road trip, so they crap the bed. They're not in the playoffs. They're right where we expect them to be. If they do well on this and they make the playoffs, great. That's a nice extra. Like, if as Flames fans, you always want to see them win, right? But if we look at what the plan for this season was, really, it doesn't matter what they do from here on out.
No, it doesn't. And
if they don't make the playoffs, they don't make the playoffs. That's fine. If they do make the playoffs, they do make the playoffs. That's fine. But don't mortgage anything to try and make that happen.
Yeah.
If you start saying, let's put Soloviev and let's put Poirier and let's start trying guys out from the farm, even if we're willing to lose to do it. Great. You should be doing that.
Well, you don't have to sacrifice anything either.
You don't have to sacrifice, but I think you have to be willing to say, hey, maybe we didn't have the NHL player we needed in that spot. We're willing to try it and understand what that means, right?
I just think that just for me, you don't need to overreact one way or the other. I think it's ultimately just stay the course and we'll get there wherever that is.
No, I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
I think that we just, again, as Flames fans, it's exciting. The deadline's coming. It's exciting to see trades coming. Just relax and just remember what this team is and what they're expected to be this year as we move into the deadline season. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So for us, I'm sure we are going to talk about the situations going on with the Canucks and all the issues going on with the Canucks. Quinn Hughes' health, Kevin Lankinen's extension, Thatcher Demko's injury, Quinn Hughes' injury, Brock Besser's future, Elias Pettersson's Elias Pettersson's injury, not Elias Pettersson's injury, the future Rick Tocchet. There's lots going on in Vancouver. We will discuss that at some point this week, and then we'll be back next week to talk more Flames. You can follow us on X/Twitter at Shifts and Pucks, Facebook.com Shifts and Pucks, YouTube.com Shifts and Pucks, Twitch.com Shifts and Pucks. Subscribe wherever you get your audio. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We will talk to you all very soon. Bye for now.